Welcome to Business Recipe. Every business has a recipe. Here's theirs. Today's recipe: Epic Systems, a software company in a cornfield outside Madison, Wisconsin, that holds medical records for 325 million Americans and has never answered to a single shareholder. Judith Faulkner is 82 years old. She owns 47% of Epic's voting shares. Her net worth is $7.8 billion. She has never sold a share. She has never taken the company public. And she built an EHR monopoly not by writing the best software, but by making it impossible for any hospital to leave. Two attorney generals now agree. Here's the recipe we're examining today. The ingredients that made Epic possible. The method that locked every hospital in. The result now visible in 2 active antitrust lawsuits. And who is actually eating the cost. 3 things you will understand by the end. Why switching from Epic costs more than building a hospital from scratch. The specific legal mechanism Epic used to block a competitor from treating 2,800 cancer patients. And the one procedural move Texas made to stop Epic from escaping to a friendlier court. The thesis: Epic became a monopoly not by building the best software, but by making leaving more expensive than staying, and then charging rent on the trapped ecosystem. In 1979, Judith Faulkner started a company called Human Services Computing with a $70,000 investment from friends and family. No venture capital. No outside investors. One of Epic's 12 founding principles: the company will never go public. So Faulkner would never be influenced by stockholders to act against her customers' best interests. That principle is 45 years old and has never been tested because the pressure to sell has never arrived. The ingredients came together in the 2000s. Hospitals were drowning in paper. The HITECH Act of 2009 created federal incentives for digital health records, subsidizing a transition that Epic was built to capture. Already entrenched in academic medical centers, Epic absorbed the government-funded adoption wave. 40 miles southwest of Madison, Faulkner built a campus designed to feel like a destination. Themed buildings from Harry Potter, Alice in Wonderland, Lord of the Rings, hotels and restaurants on site, employees who never need to leave, and if they do, a non-compete covering approximately 4,500 organizations, including Epic's own hospital customers. A former Epic engineer couldn't legally go work at Northwell Health or Cleveland Clinic for a year after departure. The best people in healthcare IT stayed inside the orbit. The scale by 2024, 325 million patient records. 54.9% of all U.S. hospital beds, not facilities, beds. Revenue, an estimated $5.7 billion, private. No 10K, no earnings call. Exactly as designed. Those are the ingredients. What Faulkner built was not just software. It was a kitchen that once you cooked in it, you never wanted to leave. And if you did, you'd owe a bill that looked less like a cancellation fee and more like burning the whole restaurant down. The method was straightforward. Make entry expensive. Make exit impossible. Then price accordingly. The entry cost is documented in hospital budgets that became public through SEC filings and Becker's reporting. Northwell Health, the largest health system in New York, is projecting $1.2 billion to implement Epic. Trinity Health, $800 million across 101 hospitals. Advent Health, $660 million, Tallahassee Memorial. Healthcare, $234 million. Inspira Health, $120 million. These are not subscriptions. They are capital expenditures. Once spent, they do not come back. A hospital CFO who approved a $660 million Epic rollout cannot go to the board 3 years later and say, let's switch to something cheaper. The $660 million is sunk. The exit cost isn't in the contract. It's in the capital budget you already burned. The non-compete agreements made the labor side of the equation just as sticky. As of 2019, Epic's agreements barred former employees from working at approximately 4,500 organizations, including health systems that were Epic's own paying customers. The Texas AG's complaint describes this as suppressing talent recruitment by every competitor in the sector. Epic didn't just lock in hospitals. It locked up the people who understood how to build the competition. The data portability problem completed the trap. Epic stores patient records in proprietary formats. MyChart, Epic's patient portal, has 180 million active users who have spent years building a digital health history inside Epic's walls. When a hospital switches EHR systems, that history doesn't automatically leave with them. The patient's data is technically the patient's, but accessing it outside the Epic ecosystem requires precisely the kind of interoperability that Epic has spent years resisting. In 2020, Judith Faulkner personally emailed hospital executives across the country, asking them to lobby against HHS rules that would have required Epic to share data more freely. The rules passed. But for years before the 21st Century Cures Act forced compliance, the default was data flows in. Data doesn't flow out. The result of this method was a market that looked like competition on paper. Multiple vendors, government oversight, public contracts, but function like a monopoly in practice. 2 federal lawsuits are now making that argument in court, and one of them has already survived Epic's attempt to kill it before discovery. By spring 2024, the result was visible, not in a press release, but in a court filing. Particle Health is a health IT company that operates on national health information networks, Care Quality and Commonwealth, the pipelines that move patient records between providers. Epic, as the record keeper for most of those providers, sits at the center of those pipes. In spring 2024, Epic blocked Particle's access. The stated reason? Epic reclassified Particle's transactions as payer use, not treatment use, which disqualified them from the network under Epic's interpretation of the rules. This reclassification came after years of Particle operating on the same networks, under the same rules, with Epic's tacit acceptance. The complaint describes Epic deploying a multi-tentacled approach, cutting off data access, filing complaints that were later discredited, and overwhelming Particle's support operations to force them out of the market. The direct harm described in the complaint: a network of community oncology practices treating more than 2,800 patients. Oncologists who could not receive their patients' clinical records because Epic had reclassified the data flow as non-compliant. Jason Prestinario, Particle's CEO, said publicly that Epic's actions had caused real patient harm and that the company was asking what stops Epic from doing this to every competitor that emerges. Particle filed a federal antitrust lawsuit on September 23, 2024, in the Southern District of New York. In September 2025, Judge Naomi Buchwald allowed 3 of Particle's federal antitrust claims to proceed. Section 2 monopolization survived. Tortious interference survived. The case is now in discovery, meaning Epic must open its internal communications about why it blocked Particle's access. That discovery is the part Epic's lawyers are working hardest to avoid. In December 2025, Texas AG Ken Paxton filed separately under the Texas Free Enterprise and Antitrust Act. He deliberately chose state law, not the Sherman Act, which prevented Epic from removing the case to federal court. Texas alleges Epic denies or delays record access for providers who chose not to use Epic's system, ensuring that only Epic can decide which companies are allowed to compete in healthcare IT. Before the verdict, the strongest case for Epic deserves to be heard, on its own terms. First, Epic earned its market position by building genuinely superior software. Epic consistently tops KLAS rankings, healthcare IT's independent benchmarking service. Oracle spent $28.3 billion to acquire Cerner in 2022 and has lost a net 74 hospitals since. Meditech lost 57 hospitals in 2024. If Epic were merely a lock-in scheme, a $28 billion competitor should have broken the lock by now. It hasn't. Second, Epic's stated reason for blocking Particle's data access wasn't competitive advantage. It was patient safety. Epic argued that Particle's payer-related transactions created a risk of patient records being used by insurance companies to deny coverage rather than treat patients. The purpose of use distinction that Epic invoked exists precisely to prevent that misuse. A company holding data for 325 million people has a legitimate interest in controlling how that data flows, and to whom. Both arguments are serious, which is why the discovery phase matters more than the trial. What Epic's internal emails say about why it blocked Particle, that's the evidence that will either validate the defense or incinerate it. 2 lawsuits in 2 courts, a federal judge who let one through, a state AG who outmaneuvered Epic's venue removal. The oven has been open since December 2025, but some people already have their bill. The cost doesn't land on Epic. It lands on the community oncologist who can't see her patient's last 6 months of labs because a competitor's data access was reclassified as non-compliant. It lands on the hospital CFO who approved a $660 million IT budget and still can't get the system to talk to the pharmacy across the street. And it lands on the 180 million patients who discovered that their medical history belongs to them in principle, but lives in Epic's servers in practice. Epic is not a software vendor in the conventional sense. It is infrastructure. Like a hospital's electrical grid, nobody switches unless the pain of staying exceeds the pain of leaving. And Epic has systematically ensured that pain never arrives. Every administrator who complains about Epic pricing in private keeps paying the bill, because the alternative is writing off $1 billion in sunk costs and rebuilding clinical workflows from scratch. This is what the commissary supplier, who got exclusive contracts with every hospital kitchen in America, looks like from the inside. You want to cook? You buy from them, at their price, forever. The competitor graveyard confirms the mechanism. Oracle paid $28.3 billion for Cerner in 2022. In 2024, Oracle Health lost 74 hospitals and declined to publish a new contracts list for the first time. Allscripts, rebranded as Veradigm, now holds 3.6% of the ambulatory market. Epic added 176 hospitals, its largest annual net gain on record. Epic didn't beat these companies purely on merit. It beat them by making the hospitals that had already paid too much to move. And then there is Faulkner, who still hasn't sold a share, still hasn't taken the company public, and has pledged to give away virtually everything before she dies. She built one of the most consequential private companies in American healthcare, answerable to no investor, no public market, and no board she did not create herself. The question the lawsuits force: what happens to 325 million patient records when the single founder who has always said never sell eventually cannot say it anymore? There are 3 signs that a market has passed the point of normal competition. Epic checks all 3. 3 signs that a company has graduated from dominant to infrastructure nobody can remove. The first sign: the exit cost exceeds the entry cost. Northwell spent $1.2 billion to get into Epic, leaving costs every dollar of that, plus the productivity loss of rebuilding clinical workflows that took a decade to train. When the sunk cost of staying is cheaper than the sunk cost of leaving, competition has already ended. Epic engineered this with every hospital that signed in the 2000s and 2010s. Not through coercion, through math. The second sign: the company controls the labor pool of its own sector. Epic's non-compete agreements, 4,500 organizations, including its own customers, meant that the engineers who most understood how to compete with Epic could not legally go build the competitor. When a single company controls not just the market but the talent that could disrupt the market, the moat has a moat. The third sign: the company redefines the rules of data access when a competitor starts winning. What Epic did to Particle Health in spring 2024, reclassifying years of accepted data transactions as suddenly non-compliant, is the behavior of a company that is no longer competing. It is defending territory. A company that changes the definition of valid use the moment a challenger shows up has already admitted it cannot win on the merits. The recipe for a data monopoly isn't a better product. It's making your product the infrastructure everyone is afraid to remove, and then charging rent on the fear. If this opens something for you, follow Business Recipe. We're building the Hospital Kitchen series one recipe at a time. Next, the prior authorization machine. How American healthcare built a bureaucracy specifically designed to say no, and what it costs the system every time it does. Today's recipe, complete. So, what business should we crack open next? Drop the company name in the comments. We read them. If you want more case studies like this one, subscribe. New recipe every Tuesday.